talked about it yesterday, the monetary revolution, as Nick Spanos had coined the phrase, and what has fueled that is the decentralization. So you can use the blockchain in a centralized manner inside a company or a government structure or for file sharing or anything like that. But certainly what has fueled this revolution that we've had over the last decade is the decentralization of it, is this autonomous type of organization that we have. And it has challenged the status quo, it has challenged the monetary system, it has challenged different governments. We can see what's happening now in Central America and South America, and I think that will continue as the different countries start accepting cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And it is influencing the governmental structures, or stressing them, as we could say, but we can even see my friend President Vitt somewhere, I think he's out there right now, started his country Liberland, and they're relying on blockchain for a lot of their governmental structure, using the merits, which are their token or their coin, and they're using that and how much of that you have in order to vote and everything else. And this is not a foreign structure. I mean, in the US, initially you had to own property in order to vote. And so as we see this moving forward, it's something that nobody really saw coming, I think. Or maybe some people did, but I certainly didn't. But it's changed the world, and you can see out here we have several different crypto companies. They're everywhere, and it's going to continue to happen.
I'm going to liken this to a technology shift in the late 90s. So we often talk about overused cliche about where we're at right now with blockchain or cryptocurrency. So I'm not going to overuse that. When we think about telecommunications, because I spent most of my career at Cisco, and then in technology was for MEOG when Bitcoin was more academic. There's transitory technologies or processes that have to occur. So when we talk about centralization and decentralization, and following to Nick's keynote, people think it's still polarized, and it might be polarized at an ideological level. But in terms of actually where we're getting to is this convergence between centralized and decentralized until we ultimately get to where people think they want to be. Because we're not yet in a world where either side is going to be completely embraced. Right? And so the examples that we just gave, that's great. There's certain countries that are adopting technology for infrastructural reasons, but then if you think about the quote-unquote Western mindset, Western world where things are established, coming from large banks, the US and Europe and the UK have very established banking regimes and structures. That will not go to a decentralized anytime soon. That might actually hold back those industries in financial services because we call it the excruciating weight of the cost of compliance holds back for innovation. So I think we can see a lot of fintech and a lot of other solutions not happening from those jurisdictions, happening faster, which actually puts more pressure on. Pressure in a good way for the decentralists, but this is where the resistance comes in. This is what we talked about before we got on stage, and this is why we're still in very, very early innings, using a baseball analogy, to where anyone thinks we're going to be. I think no one actually knows where we're going to be. I know Nick was talking about the permissionless dream, which I think many people would agree with on an ideological level, especially those in the have-not category. We're just not there yet. So this is just a really healthy conversation.
What I'm thinking about is, right now, the blockchain technology, even we have blockchain technology since 2008. In the last 5 or 6 years, it became more and more popular. And what I'm thinking about is that is going to be an adoption in more and more sectors of activity that really need the decentralization of the blockchain. But of course, not all the sectors of activity will need the decentralization. So that's why what our colleague told us before, we are going to find a middle way between centralization and decentralization, and there are going to be sectors of activity that is going to migrate a lot on decentralization, and there are going to be other sectors that are going to use the central way that we used before, the blockchain. But what is pretty sure that the blockchain is going to change a lot of things in our life in the future.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir, in front. I don't have a t-shirt to throw for you. Usually, anyone who asks a question gets a t-shirt, but a virtual t-shirt has been thrown.
Question, please.
I need a microphone.
We'll repeat the question, make it short.
Oh, okay. So, what are your thoughts on CBDC, central bank digital currency, basically?
Central bank
As
digital currency.
opposed to the decentralized, do you think one of them will win the battle, or are they going to coexist? If they are going to coexist, is there any initiative that is being built to bridge the two?
The question was about centralized.
The question is that the
CBDC versus
central bank currency,
central bank versus decentralized.
decentralized world. Since they both coexist.
Will they coexist or what's so talk about CBDCs, please. Tell us about this cannabis, CBDCs. For those who don't know, now it has to do with money and not cannabis, apparently. I'll just repeat two of these questions I heard it. CBDC, not cannabis, centralized bank digital currencies. Will they coexist or will one prevail? Or are you saying that, well, the way I look at it is jurisdictions, so US, China, EU are coming out with their own centralized bank digital currencies, and they're adopting that. And we see what's happening actually in China, right? The reason why all the Chinese miners are coming to other parts of the world is because they're effectively shut down because China is promoting their digital currency. At least that's perceived as why they're taking the action. I think that jurisdictionally you have to create a digital currency because of things like at some point we can't continue to print fiat money, there's no enough resources to do that. So there will be a digital, centralized digital currency. One thing I talk about from a technologist perspective, and this is usually freaks out my crypto anarchist friends, is Bitcoin is great as long as you have access to it. If the jurisdiction shuts down your ability to get to the network, even though you have it, how do you actually get access to it? You're either stuck or you cannot reach it because of the lack of connectivity. So ultimately, I think that that's why I'm really thinking that there's going to be a hybrid at some point. Because unless you have your own ability to have your own networking protocols, your own ability to get to the network and transact, you effectively don't have it. And that's my thoughts on that.
I would just add that I think central bank digital currencies are absolutely inevitable, and I think that they will actually encourage more Bitcoin adoption as people get more and more comfortable with the technology. And I think they each have a very different use case. I think they will coexist, and I think they're going to help with the overall adoption of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, we have a public ledger system, right? And so I think at this point to think that Bitcoin is going to be taken out some way is obviously not going to happen. You have different currencies like Ripple and other ones who obviously have these relationships that go back a long way, and the bank's looking and seeing a very effective way to move value from one place to the other very fast and very effectively. So they're both going to coexist. They're both going to be used, and that's great for everybody.
Let me broaden it. So, what are examples of good uses of blockchain? We talk about this, CBDCs, or other uses of blockchain.
I'll just jump on that because one of the things that, and then I'm sure other people have greater examples, but one of the things that I've seen being in the space so long is that we've used it for philanthropic work, charitable work. And it is one of the things that if you want to support a different project or something like that, you can put it out there. And it's a very giving community, actually. And it's an easy way to raise money for certain things, whether you need to get it to an earthquake zone or this or that or the other. It's also a very good way of tracking it, since we have a public ledger system there. Where are the funds going? What are they being used for? Where are they?
Thank you. That reminds me, I consider distributed ledger as digital trust. It leads to transparency because everyone can read the blockchain that's been written. The question is who can write it. And so this is a great use that charities need to be transparent because you can't really trust them otherwise.
Just clarifying, only in a decentralized permissionless system, because if you have a centralized system, you can still obscure or obfuscate. So
Thank you. And that's a good use for permissionless and decentralized. Thank you. Other successful uses of blockchain.
Well, one challenge, let's go back to CBDC for a second.
Okay.
Biggest challenge is the first word, central, because this technology, we're talking about decentralization. So again, we need to find that happy medium, but this is quite a challenge for the current central banks that are out there. And so it's going to be quite difficult for them to be able to produce a digital technology that represents money when they're up against people like a lot of us in this room, entrepreneurs. And so, you know, is the government going to outperform entrepreneurs on the technological front?
No.
Not very likely. This is going to be a major challenge, yes. So they're outgunned. Government salary just doesn't cut it.
But there's smart, very smart people working in government. I just want to say that.
So the other problem, though, is just the interoperability of it. You know, with the current technologies that are available, it's going to be very challenging when one country on one side of the world creates their version, and on the other side, someone else has a different version, like China, for example. Their idea of how this works is rather incompatible with probably most of the way that we think here. So I don't think anybody who is a high net worth individual is going to take their $1 billion and put it in the hands of someone who you could wake up tomorrow and say, actually, it's not yours. I'm not okay with that plan.
Any other positive things?
I totally agree. I totally agree that it's going to be very challenging, but I honestly believe that it's one-way road. There's no turning back right now.
So let me give some possible places where this distributed ledger technology could be really useful. From financial work, a lot of people I know in New York want to securitize real estate. So you put pieces of it on a public distributed ledger, you can sell pieces of it. A friend of mine wants to securitize his artwork. I think it's easier to sell 100 units of a Caravaggio piece at $1 million each, rather than an entire Caravaggio at $100 million. I might be wrong. So securitization, real estate, artwork, NFTs, as an example. Can you think of positive examples that you know of that exist, or those that you believe are coming? We know that now that coins are, CBDCs are inevitable, you're already here. Anything else that you think is inevitable or you'd like to see using distributed ledger?
So just following up on your example in real estate, so one of my investments, Shintai, which was just funded by Block One, they're doing a white label primary and secondary digital asset exchange. So in this example, your real estate or other forms of securitization can happen as they get registered in Singapore. But that is exactly where it's democratizing the ability to securitize all types of assets.
I didn't hear exactly what, did you say fractional ownership? If not, that's definitely one spot that I'd like to touch on. You know, you see it in the NFT space, the fractional ownership, of course, the real estate and everything being put on the blockchain, securitized with the blockchain. That is something that's been moved forward quite a bit. But in this space now with the NFTs, we see this happening more with digital signatures and the, being able to get your trademarks on there and really fractionalize large purchases, and it kind of democratizes the whole process.
And I don't want to take away from our next panel. We're talking about digital assets, NFTs, and DeFi.
Your next panel.
Our next panel. Well, my next panel. But what I was going to say though is that you think about not just the terminology NFT, but the ability for content creators to actually quote unquote license and get a recurring revenue stream from their art in perpetuity in a smart contract. That's truly things beyond what we're actually talking about right now. These are things that are coming.
We have 2 minutes, and I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna add, I think we would all like to see some sort of supply chain solution,
Yeah, thank you.
but we don't see one that's working today.
That's too bad. I mean, that, to me, that's where the most important work might be done. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to ask, what do you think the impact of using the blockchain technology would be for the society and also for all the governments to use it for election votes?
Use of blockchain on election. I'm sort of against it. Go ahead.
Stop the
disaster
cheating.
for the current structure.
Yeah, there's so many problems with that.
I think nobody can honestly respond to this question.
Yeah, you want paper, I'm sorry.
No, but it's an important question. It actually goes beyond just the voting for an election, because we're talking governance now, which everyone here has a stake in. So if we want to clean up governance, if you're an investor in a company, you need good governance. I mean, you want to build the trust that people are doing what they're doing.
Why aren't
People are
we
accountable.
using it for the society then?
Yeah, the core question was, what do we think about using blockchain for keeping track of the election and voting results, which this is not necessarily solved by technology, because technology can absolutely solve that question. Now it goes back to the same thing we're talking about in and centralized currencies is that when the jurisdiction, as a society, decides that they want to actually be transparent and record their voting results on the blockchain, because the technology itself is super easy.
We have a minute left, and so let's make it for investors. I remember when hedge funds were coming into AI and different stuff. So when investors come in, what should they look for in a startup that uses the word distributed ledger or blockchain for good investments? What investments have you seen that suck? Tell me some hard stories, or tell me what investors should look for.
One thing I would clarify is that you want to think more about friction in a system. So when you're looking at the investments that you have, where is the friction in that system? Because this technology is going to make more peer-to-peer transactions much more simplified. So many corporations, you can look at, say, 10 different revenue streams. And if you start analyzing them, some of them, they're charging rents for things that really they're not providing any useful service. Checking accounts. I mean, things like this, this stuff's going to change. And so if you were holding investments like this, you're going to want to really take a look at the companies that you have and who's going to be most impacted by this technology going forward.
I honestly missed the question because I was just thinking about, Nick Spanos actually has the patents for voting technology, so if you do want to talk to him, he's right over there on the table right there.
You want? That work?
Investors should really look about so in the blockchain right now there are different, if we are talking about the cryptocurrency, there are a lot of projects that
We're talking about blockchain, so.
Sorry?
Blockchain technology, not just cryptocurrency.
In the blockchain technology, there's a lot of projects that doesn't have a real solid background. So the first thing that an investor should look about is about the background and what that project is about, and if it has a real utility in the real life. And this is what I would look about.
We don't have to, one final question from the audience, if you want to be brief. I know you want my point you want to ask. I don't see any hands up.
Hey, Rick, just really quick, when most companies pitch blockchain, and that's their lead, that's where we run, because the majority of pitches right now bring up blockchain, distributed ledger, doesn't lead, and that's usually my experience.
Yeah, you want to make sure they're solving a real problem.
You just can't throw AI or blockchain at it and solve the problem?
Who knew?
No, you cannot.
In the last 2 years.